over 11,000 calls, which is kind of in line with where we've been. Again, we saw increases in the number of chats and texts, and a great number of that 11,000 represented people who were calling who needed help, whether it be the person themselves or friends or family members. Again, this is the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline. It's 24 hours. It's 7 days a week. Anybody can call it for more information. And we pretty much refer to this as our primary resource and primary avenue for people to get the help that they need. So as we got into 2020, after the new year, again, our conference registration launched, and we had several training requests coming in, kind of unusually high for this early in the year, which obviously was a good thing. By mid-January, I would say we probably had somewhere around 40 to 45 trainings scheduled, different types of meetings, events, different shapes and sizes. But it was really, the expanse. We were going to be in, I think at one point I counted, we had trainings and events scheduled in over 20 counties throughout the state, including Westmoreland. Obviously, we were planning to participate today. At one point I realized that I was basically planning to be on the road for at least a couple of days every week, or every week between the end of February and the end of June. So it was a busy time, obviously. And the biggest events for us were the annual statewide conferences, which I mentioned a moment ago. And these, again, are held typically during the first 2 weeks in conjunction with Problem Gambling Awareness Month in the month of March. We have, usually the first week is the East event, which takes place in the Philadelphia area. And then the West event takes place in Pittsburgh, right on the grounds of the University of Pittsburgh by the Cathedral of Learning. With regard to the 2020 conferences, things were going great. We had record numbers of registrations for both events. We had a total of 320 people, I think it was, registered for both events. So we had people coming in from all over Pennsylvania. We had people from neighboring states. We were really, really excited about the events and everything that everything related, all of the trainings that we had coming up. Everything was, really coming together nicely. So, we fast forward through March. Honestly, January, February, they were kind of a blur just because everything was so busy. And before we knew it, we were at conference week. So conference week, we hold our conferences on the first Thursday and second Thursday. That week, we held an event on the Tuesday. It was organized by the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs. It was basically a recognition of Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and it was a kickoff event. This was held in Harrisburg, right across from the Capitol at Strawberry Square. It was a terrific event. We had a whole host of different folks. Secretary Jen Smith was there. She acted as a moderator for the event, and I participated. The director of the Gaming Control Board, Kevin O'Toole, he participated, as did Liz Lanza and Elizabeth Birch, who Liz Lanza is the director of the Office of Compulsive and Problem Gambling, which is part of the Gaming Control Board. And they operate the self-exclusion programs in Pennsylvania. They participated. We had folks from the lottery. We had State Representative Jason Ortatai was there. Providers from all across the state were there. It was just a really positive event. It was a great way to kick off what we thought was going to be a really, really eventful month. So that was on the 3rd. That was Tuesday. I headed back towards Philly. The conference, I live right around the Philadelphia area. So I headed home, started to get everything ready for the 5th, which was our East Conference. The conference went great. Everything was really successful. We had a great turnout. Over 200 people ended up attending. The feedback was excellent. I had a chance to connect with a lot of old friends, people I haven't seen in a long time. I had a chance to meet a lot of new people. Overall, just a really, really good day. At this point, coronavirus was here in the United States, but it wasn't the main topic of conversation by any stretch. There were people who were talking about it. I'm thinking there was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 cases in the U.S. at this point, most in the Pacific Northwest. Still none in Pennsylvania. And I believe just before the conference, I remembered hearing that the first case in New York State had just been announced. So, the conference went, I went home, I went to bed, I woke up the next morning and early headed to Newark, Delaware, where the Delaware Council was holding their state conference. So this was March 6th now. And things were pretty much business as usual for the most part. Obviously, I wasn't the organizer. I was just a participant. So I had it was a little bit more casual. It was more relaxed. I had conversations with people that were a little bit longer than I was able to have the day before at our conference, because I was kind of running around, putting out fires and that sort of thing. And I definitely noticed more chatter about it. It didn't seem to really impact much, but there was just more discussion about it. That day, obviously I wanted to participate as much as I could, but we still had the event the next week in Pittsburgh. So I was kind of in and out of workshops and, finalizing some things and making some calls, organizing, like picking up printing and that sort of thing, the stuff that you do when you have conferences. At one point I even checked the weather, because that's always a concern. I checked the weather for Pittsburgh. I actually sent this screenshot to my wife. Just said, look at this. This is next week in Pittsburgh, 56 and sunny. And there's always a bit of anxiety, when we're organizing conferences in the first and second week in March, and we have people flying in from all around the country. Having a conference in the Northeast at that time of year, it creates some sleepless nights leading up to it. So this year when I saw that, I thought, okay, this is great. The weather was being quite forgiving. And everything was working out, or at least, that was what I thought at this point. So again, this was March 6th. Later that day, Governor Wolf reported, I was actually driving home from the conference. He reported Pennsylvania finally had its first 2 confirmed cases. They were both in eastern Pennsylvania, not far from where I was in the Delaware conference. So I actually drove through one of the counties where it was being announced, and I was driving through as it was being announced. So I remember it being kind of sobering, just, hearing that it's here, it's now here. So anyway, I get home, I go to bed, I wake up the next morning, I have an email that came in overnight from one of our West presenters, one of the presenters from the conference in Pittsburgh, who was writing to tell me that she was just going to be returning from a 6-week trip in a tour of Europe, different countries. So she had been traveling the previous several weeks all through Europe, France, and the United Kingdom, several different countries where we're really starting to hear this becoming a hot spot. Excuse me. So in addition to having this situation, she had also just been asked by her employer to impose a self-imposed quarantine for 14 days. So clearly, the idea of having her come to Pittsburgh to present when she's being asked to self-quarantine, that created some issue. So we had to rethink things, and that's exactly what we started doing. Our first thought was maybe we could set up some type of Skype or Zoom. I don't know if I'm actually allowed to say Skype when I'm on a Zoom meeting, so that may have just zeroed that out, but a Zoom meeting, and kind of have it virtual, similar to what we're doing today. So we started to take steps to kind of make that happen. We were just going to have her portion of the workshop become virtual. Fast forward a few hours as we're trying to kind of organize with the hotel and the audiovisual folks, and it was announced and confirmed that the first case in Montgomery County was now upon us. And this is the county where I live and where I work. This is where our offices are. And not only was there a case announced, there were several. And not only were there several, there were multiple cases announced in the town that's right next to where I live and work. So, now it's not only here, it's now home. It's really, really hitting close to home. So, this led to more discussion. And obviously the next morning we decided that it was probably going to be in our best interest just to cancel all around. We didn't want to put anybody at risk. Early Monday morning, I sent out an email canceling the conference. And, at this point, this was still Monday the 9th. I hadn't really heard about anything being canceled in large part. I know the St. Patrick's Day parades were still on. I looked in Pittsburgh. There was like a home and garden show or something like that was scheduled, and that was supposed to go on as it had been planned. There were no cases in Pittsburgh. There were still no quarantines or anything closed in the state. Obviously, this was still, very much a, is this the right thing to do? Is this a mistake? I didn't know. And that was the bottom line. So it came down for us to one simple fact that, if we hold this event and anybody gets sick, if anybody contracts anything, that's one option. Or if we cancel, then that all of a sudden creates a situation where there's a 0% chance of anybody contracting anything that we're holding. And that basically made this a very easy decision for us. The feedback overall was incredibly understanding and supportive, which we really appreciate. If there's any of you who were scheduled to attend or that you plan to attend, I apologize for the need. I know you understand why, but I do appreciate your flexibility and your understanding. After sending the email out, I do have to admit that I still questioned it. I still felt weird. I had hoped that we made the right decision. And even though I felt that we had, there was still uncertainty. And that's when things started getting really interesting. Less than 2 days after canceling, it was announced that the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and Duquesne would all be suspending students arriving from spring break, and classes were basically going to be moving to online format as a result of the arrival of the coronavirus, which had not yet arrived in Western Pennsylvania at this point. It was just anticipated. And on this slide, if you look, for those of you who aren't aware, I'm sure most of you are, that tall building, that's the Cathedral of Learning, and that's on the campus of the University of Pittsburgh. If you look all the way to the right, there's some smaller buildings there on the right-hand side. The building that you see all the way to the right next to that is where the hotel is, where our conference takes place. So, it's right on the border of the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. So we would have been right in the middle. And again, this was the 11th. Our event wasn't scheduled to take place until the next day. Later that evening, it was announced that the NBA was suspending its entire season now, until further notice after Rudy Gobert, the Utah Jazz, tested positive. Again, all of these things are happening the night before when I'm supposed to be in Pittsburgh planning for this event. So needless to say, I was starting to feel a little bit more justified in my decision, to say the least. And it felt like we had truly made the right decision. So, I remember when I started to see these things like, classes changing, and the NBA, certainly that was a big one. I remember thinking, God, everything has really changed. And for those of you who know, are following this at all, you'll know, a couple of days later, we saw the suspension of basically virtually all sports worldwide. We saw all other major sports in the United States suspended. The rest of the world followed very shortly after. The NCAA tournament, March Madness, which ultimately is the reason that March has been designated as Problem Gambling Awareness Month, canceled, just like that. Just absolutely unimaginable how dramatically everything happened and how quickly it happened. I'm going to come back to sports in a second just to kind of talk a little bit about that, because obviously that has a great impact on gambling here in Pennsylvania. The day after the conference, that was the day when all schools in Pennsylvania were closed. They were closed for 10 days after the order by Governor Wolf. Over the weekend on the 14th, this was when Allegheny County announced its first case. This wasn't the first in Western PA. Washington County had a case announced the day before on the 13th. A couple of days later, this was when all casinos were ordered to close statewide by order of the Gaming Control Board. Over the weekend prior to this, several had opted to close. I believe Rivers closed in Pittsburgh, and several of the Montgomery County area casinos had started closing, but this mandate came down on the 17th, and all casinos ceased to operate any on-site options, which obviously now opened the door for an increased participation in online gambling, because that was one of the areas that was not impacted. Sadly, on the 18th, it was revealed that the state had finally had its first corona-related death. This was a man from Northampton County, which is about an hour north of where I'm speaking to you from now. This is up in the Lehigh Valley area, Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton, for those of you who are familiar with this part of the state. So that's what it took. It was from the first case in the state to the first person passing away, 12 days. And, while as this became more and more real and we all became more and more aware of it, obviously this is something that we knew was coming, but just so incredibly striking and sad to hear. As many of you know, it began to spread west from, this point, it began to spread out. Westmoreland County had its first case confirmed. I believe it was on the 19th, so just the day after this gentleman passed away. And then over the weekend, it was announced that on the 21st, the Department of Health announced that the state's second death took place. This occurred in Allegheny County. So even faster than it occurred in the eastern part of the state, just 1 week after Western PA's first case was announced, we lost our second individual in Pennsylvania. And just over the weekend, I was just looking and trying to figure out where things stood as far as across the state. We now have situations taking place in over 40 counties. As of Sunday, this marked the first person passing away from coronavirus in my county, in Montgomery County. There were also 4 cases that at that point in Westmoreland. This morning, I saw the number has risen to 11. There's currently, I looked this morning and there were apparently 850 cases, but I believe that may be up over 1,000 now throughout the state. Again, 40 plus counties that are impacted. We've now lost 7 people as a result. And I'm sure by the time this webinar is over, that number is probably going to be changed again. This thing is just moving so quickly. So, that brings us to right now. Again, I apologize for recapping it. I think there was an element where I needed to get some things off my chest and just talk a little bit about what we've experienced and just how impactful it's been. And here we are. We're all at a webinar. We're all in our individual homes and we're locked down and we're sheltering in place and following all the orders. And, it's all still kind of really up in the air as to what lies ahead. But, when we look back, when I look back to the beginning of the year, if I even look back 3 weeks tomorrow, 3 weeks ago is when our East conference was. And, I'm sure you can relate to this. That feels like an absolute lifetime ago. To try to even begin to comprehend just everything that's happened, it's just absolutely unfathomable. But what we realize, what we realize at the council and what a lot of the folks that we work with have realized that, as quickly as this has all happened, we need to adapt and change what we're doing even more quickly. Case in point, this webinar, just changing something as quickly as that all came about. This is how the response is going to have to be for folks that are struggling in mental health situations and drug and alcohol situations, and certainly in gambling situations as well. And certainly burying our heads in the sand is not going to be that fix that we need. We really need to come up with new creative solutions. And, while the availability of gambling certainly has been dramatically reduced, there is still a lot of gambling out there, both legal and illegal. And there's a lot of people who are participating. There's a lot of people who are struggling, and there are a lot of people who are at risk. I mentioned online gambling. This kind of came to the forefront. Obviously, on a regulated level, while there are currently no casinos that are open, there is still, a pretty significant amount of iGaming that's available in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of participation. And for those of you who aren't aware, this is basically a casino-based game in an online format, so slots and poker and that sort of thing, still very much available. And while we haven't had any specific uptick in iGaming related calls, I've been monitoring this closely with our folks at the helpline. We do expect that will be the case in the coming months, very similar to how we saw an increase in sports. It didn't happen immediately. It was something that had kind of a gradual effect. Right now is the time when people are starting to participate, and then the problems will begin to build, and then we'll start to see people reaching out. We're already receiving calls and seeing reports about online gambling operators stating that they're seeing significant increases in spikes in the volume of revenue that's being generated and the volume of participants. Over the past week or so, some even reporting that they've seen double and triple the rate of new accounts opening since this has all started. So obviously this is going to continue to be a focus not only of generating revenue for operators and for the state, but of us reaching out and trying to do everything we can to put folks who might be starting to experience problems or who have problems in touch with, with help. Obviously, as one of the primary ways people will be able to access gambling, it's safe to assume that, at some point there will be an increase in people who are experiencing these issues. And we just want to make sure that hopefully they are reaching out for help. With regard to sports betting, because this has virtually stopped all sports worldwide for the most part, there's virtually nothing to wager on, especially in Pennsylvania, which has pretty strict guidelines as far as what types of events can and cannot be wagered upon. But there are still a lot of offshore sites that are still in operation, and they're coming up with all kinds of creative ways to offer different types of wagers. There's the one I found interesting. There's real life NBA players who are teaming up with their teammates. They're all at their virtual locations. Excuse me. And they're actually playing NBA 2K20 as themselves, as the team that they play for, and they're playing together the rest of their regular season. And what they're doing is they're posting these games online, and there are sites that will allow you to wager on these types of events. There are people who have been, I just read a report about this, there's people who are streaming live marble races. They're building elaborate tracks in their basements and backyards and garages, and then they're having races with marbles, different colored marbles, and just like kids play with. And wagers are being placed because these are things that are being posted live on the internet, being streamed, and people are placing wagers. And as this headline shows, even the weather. There are sites that are taking bets on outcomes of weather, rain totals, snowfall totals, top wind gusts, virtually anything. So, I talk with a lot of people, and excuse me, I have a lot of friends who are in recovery for gambling and have been for many years. And, I've been checking in with them over the past couple of weeks as everything's going on, just to make sure that they're in a good space. This has come up several times, and, what's overwhelmingly consistent is the response that I hear. And that has, a tone of, for gamblers, they're not going to care what they're betting on, just as long as they can place a bet. So, to have things like this available, it might be funny. It might be, something that's kind of done to just, alleviate stress or just to add some levity to a pretty intense situation. But there are people out there who will not look at it that way and will not be able to control themselves. And, that's the thing, is that, just because the world's virtually been turned upside down as a result of this, the people who had problems before it started, they didn't go away. Those problems are still there. And as research suggests, you see a lot of the statistics, 1%, 2%, 3%, they're still out there. And those percentages equate to real people. And in Pennsylvania, as many of you probably have heard in the past, that equates to as many as 300,000 people. They're out there. And, for them, this isn't a situation where they can just stop. They can just turn it off, or, they're not going to be able to access it. So I just won't. They'll find another way if that's what they need to do. And that's where we really need to make sure that, just because so many different types of gambling abruptly came to a halt, there are still plenty of ways for people to access it. And whether it be to experience and continue on with some level of action, or to escape from this craziness that we're all experiencing, it's important that we continue to do everything that we can to provide help where it's needed. And, and obviously in every situation, no matter how challenging or how bad it may be, there's always opportunity to come up with new and creative ways to solve problems and to connect people with different situations. And while it often requires some level of outside the box thinking, that's where we're at. And these are, there are options out there. And the one option that we're recognizing is really vital at this point is the use of teletherapy, all across different types of situations, whether it be medicine and health-related situations, obviously any type of addiction, mental health services, gambling being one of them. For quite some time now, there have been some counselors throughout the state, some agencies throughout the state who have been implementing teletherapy over the course of the past year or two, which, for those of you who aren't aware, this is basically providing services to a client who's not able to attend for whatever reason a in-person session. So, in many cases, this has been related to geographic barriers, or maybe health reasons, possibly transportation limitations. But whatever it was, it impeded on the ability of that person to meet in person. Today, the reasons might be different for why somebody's not able to participate in person, but it's just as important, if not more important than ever, to have these types of services in place. Last Friday, the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs, which you may or may not be aware of. They're the ones who basically partner with providers to be able to provide gambling treatment services. Once somebody goes through a certain set of steps as far as trainings and steps to become certified or to pursue certification, they can also apply with the department to become a contracted provider. Last Friday, it was announced that basically contracted gambling providers would now have the ability to provide assessments and outpatient treatment services to clients and have the ability to receive reimbursements for doing so. Obviously, not every counselor in the state is prepared to offer this type of service. This is something that's new. It's something that's frightening to some people. But again, we're in a position now where we're not really going to have a whole lot of choice. It's vital in the days ahead, and certainly the weeks and possibly months ahead, not only for clients, but also for practitioners to start to implement some type of tool. Excuse me. I would like to invite you all, please consider this Friday at noon, the Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, our counterpart in Ohio. They also serve as a state affiliate, as we do in Pennsylvania for the National Council on Problem Gambling. They're hosting this webinar that's going to focus on quick steps to get started with telehealth. Some of you may have seen my good friend and colleague Jody Bechtel present on this topic in the past. She was actually slated to participate in the conference in Westmoreland County today, I believe. She's going to discuss basically very quick steps that can be taken in order to kind of just get off the ground and running. It's going to be sort of down and dirty. We encourage people not to be afraid, to embrace it. Obviously, it's not as challenging as you may think. And once you learn how to do something, it gets easier each time. There are some things to consider, and this is what Jody's going to cover. And Jody and I are actually working together to put something on our website as well that's going to be very similar. So it's something that you'll be able to download. But if you can register and participate on Friday, please do so. You see here, there's the address where you can go to register, or if you like, you can visit our website, which is www.pacouncil.com. On our events page, we have this listed as well, with a link that you can click on to get to it. And while you're there, please take a moment to sign up for our emails. This is something that we send out generally once a month. That's probably going to change pretty dramatically, over the next couple of weeks. I anticipate we'll probably be sending weekly emails out that kind of announce some of the things that we're doing. We're trying to put together some level of, continuing webinar education series. This is something we've talked about doing, at some point this year. I think that timeline may have changed a little bit. It's probably going to be condensed. But I think, for the foreseeable future, web-based education is going to be a big part of what we look at in terms of outreach and awareness and that sort of thing. Take a moment to explore the website while you're there. Obviously, there's a lot of resources available. There's a lot of things that you can use, in terms of helpline and finding meetings. There's, information about some of the cancellations that we've seen. Obviously, this is a very fluid, ever-changing situation. So please check back frequently before any of you would ever refer anybody to anything, because there's a good chance that may have changed. And obviously the 1-800-GAMBLER number, that's still the primary resource that we would promote and advise that you use, or call me directly and we'll try to get you the answer that you need. I'm encouraged the Gamblers Anonymous International has started meetings. There's been a Wednesday night meeting for many years for people that either don't have access to an in-person meeting or would just simply like to, would like to have an additional option. They have just announced that they're expanding to have meetings every day of the week. So at 9 p.m. every single night of the week, there is a meeting. This is also posted on our website as well, so no need to write these down. But if there's anybody that you're aware of who's struggling, who maybe isn't able to get to a meeting because it's no longer being held in person, there are online options. And I'm also hearing about gambling addiction meetings or GA meetings being held virtually. I can't really speak too much about this. I don't have a lot of information. I do know some folks who are starting to say that their meeting rooms have switched to this. Gamblers Anonymous International, they may have the information. Their website is gamblersanonymous.org. So that would be what I would advise, to try to find out more information about this. Excuse me. As far as the virtual meetings go, again, none of these are necessarily ideal in terms of face-to-face connection, but they are an excellent second step, and in some cases, the only viable option. The Gaming Control Board, they just launched a new website. It's responsibleplay.gov, and this focuses a lot on different resources that are available. Self-exclusion, a program that many of you may know about. This is the voluntary self-ban program that for years has been solely focused on casinos, gaming floors, and property. It now has online options as well. So if there's anybody that you're aware of who's struggling and is looking to put a barrier between themselves and online gambling, this is an option that they can explore, and they can find out more at the website I just mentioned. Again, responsibleplay.pa.gov. There's a ton of great info. Again, Liz Lanza, the director of the Office of Compulsive and Problem Gambling, she's done a remarkable job with putting together these resources and services. And again, I can't say enough about the self-exclusion program and what it's achieved on a casino basis, and it's picked up right where right where the expansion took place with the online services. Also, with regard to self-exclusion in an online format, the Pennsylvania Lottery, which last year launched the Pennsylvania iLottery. These are basically online virtual instant games that people can play. There is a self-exclusion program available for that as well. PAILottery.com is their website that you can find out more information about. And then for all types of gambling online, there are services where basically software blocking services, for lack of a better term, they're available where basically you can have a service where you are not able to access from any one of your devices any type of website that has any type of gambling availability. Gamban, which you see on the screen here, excuse me, that's been the one that has received the most focus over the course of the past couple of years. They've really started to kind of promote themselves, and they've become quite popular in the field. From what I understand, the rates are relatively inexpensive. So if you or somebody that you're working with is interested in this, this is certainly an option. And again, you can find out more about this service at gamban.com. And there's other growing concerns out there that I think it's important to still recognize. For example, gaming and video gaming addiction, something that's gained a tremendous amount of focus here in Pennsylvania and throughout the country over the past couple of years. Several of the programs that we had planned for the next couple of weeks and through the spring, we're going to focus on this, and not just gaming and gaming addiction, but the tremendous overlap that there is with gambling. And at a time like this, with this extended free time many people have, the idea of escaping from what's going on, there's a lot of room for potential risks, and we just want to make sure that everybody's considering all possibilities. I would refer people to the Game Quitters website, Game Quitters, which is a group that's been founded by a gentleman named Cam Adair. Focuses on gaming addiction and resources that are available for people who are struggling. GameQuitters.com is their website. You can access videos and articles and lists of replacement hobbies and all kinds of different things. So there's plenty of ways to spend maybe unexpected free time that you may be facing over the next couple of weeks in the foreseeable future, and this would be a really good use of that time. So in closing, I know I'm well over our original time frame. Again, I thank you for allowing me to kind of vent and use this as a therapy session for myself. I still will have plenty of time for any questions that any of you have, and I'd love to do that. But again, I was trying to think, what should we focus on today, and I realized I'm kind of going on a day-by-day basis through the past several months. And a couple of years ago, a friend of mine who's in recovery, he's been in the program for a long time, he sent me this poem that I think it holds true very much in a number of different situations in everyday life, certainly in the program and in the fellowship of Gamblers Anonymous, but I think it really kind of stands to reason that this is a perfect time for it, and I'd like to share it with you. It'll only take a second, and I hope you find it as meaningful and as helpful as I do. It's my pre-poem reading, drink of water. There are 2 days in every week that we should not worry about. 2 days that should be kept free from fear and from apprehension. One is yesterday, with its mistakes and cares, its faults and blunders, its aches and pains. Yesterday is past, forever beyond our control. All the money in the world cannot bring back yesterday. We cannot undo a single act that we've performed, nor can we erase a single word we've said. Yesterday is gone. The other day we shouldn't worry about is tomorrow, with its impossible adversaries, its burden, its hopeful promise, and poor performance. Tomorrow is beyond our control. Tomorrow's sun will rise either in splendor or beyond a bank of clouds, but it will rise. And until it does, we have no stake in tomorrow, for it is yet unborn. This leaves only one day, today. Any person can fight the battles of just one day. It is only when we add the burdens of yesterday and of tomorrow that we truly break down. It is not the experience of today that drives people mad. It is the remorse for something that happened yesterday and the dread of what tomorrow may bring. So let us therefore live one day at a time. And with that being said, if we all keep doing that, taking things as they come, one step at a time, my hope is that, like this sign that was posted at my daughter's school, right at the time that schools closed, that's my hope. We will see each other again soon. I'll have the chance to see some of you again. I'll have the chance to meet some of you for the first time. And, the way I look at it is that will be a good day. So with that, I would just like to thank you for your time today. I do apologize for taking a little bit more. I hope you didn't have anywhere to be. But again, I wish you and all of your loved ones just, all of the safety and good health that I possibly can. And a big thank you again to Westmoreland Drug and Alcohol for having me today, for inviting me to participate. At this point, if you'd like to unmute yourself, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Or if you prefer, you can always contact me by email. That's my email address that's there on this slide. I would also ask that if you have the ability to scan the QR code that's in the bottom left-hand corner, this will access a brief survey, and we would appreciate any feedback that you have about today's program. I do hope it was helpful for you. I can assure you it certainly was for me, and I do appreciate your time. So thanks again, everybody.
I have a two-part question.
Okay.
Sarah's ready.
First question is, why isn't that GAM ban free? And then also, how is it, does it go by your IP address? Do you give them that information? How does it work? I'm just curious.
So why it's not free is because it's a private equity company. So they're not a state organization or anything like that. So they're basically a for-profit company trying to make money on the service. From what I understand, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $35 a year for the subscription.
So less than a gambling problem.
What's that? I'm sorry?
Less than a gambling problem, though. Cheaper.
Yeah, certainly significantly less. Certainly something that's affordable for most people, especially if they're struggling and looking to put something, seriously in the way of them being able to access it. As far as how it works and how the setup is, I'm not 100% sure. I assume, IP addresses from each device are probably, there's a lot that goes into it. Like everything, there's ways to get around things, I'm sure, but from what I hear, it's quite secure and quite easy to use, and there's a really great user interface as well. They've always been great to deal with, the folks that I know. So, as far as I understand, it's a pretty solid system, but it's going to work best for people that are truly ready to kind of take a step in that direction, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So, there's pros and cons.
Is that a device? Can you use that on a device, or is it just laptop or computer? Can you use that on a cell phone or an app or an iPad?
Virtually all devices. I don't know if there are any that it doesn't work on, but it's my understanding that if it's not all, it's on most devices that it'll work. Because I think it has mostly to do with internet access. Being able to. So if a device can access the internet, it's not necessarily the device as much as it is being able to access sites. So it's like a block device that goes into being able to access the site. Any other questions? I don't see any. Maybe there are. Hold on a sec. Are there any chats that I missed?
I don't think.
I'm sorry you guys didn't get to see my puppy.
There's still time.
If there's anything, there's still time, right? No, if there's anything, seriously, I mean, you have my information. If there's anything that I can do, down the road over the next few weeks, if there's questions I can answer, hopefully if I see you all in 2 months and 4 days from today, then that would be a good day. And that's right. Fingers crossed. That's all we can hope for.
Yeah. For anyone that wants to participate, as of right now, tentatively, we have the problem gambling conference rescheduled for May 29th, which is a Friday.
That's supposed to be my rehearsal dinner, so we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Crossing my fingers for you, Sam. We don't want to see you at the problem gambling conference.
Yes.
Yes. I actually did have a question, just an opinion question, rather.
Okay.
So what is your opinion on the sports betting trend, especially in Pennsylvania? Where do you see that going, and what are some red flags, etc.?
So as far as opinion on, will it continue to be successful or used? Or?
Well, I mean, I for sure think it's going to be successful, but as a trouble with gambling, like if somebody had a problem, do you see that availability being able to do so much on the cell phone? Where are you projecting those numbers to go?
I'll try to answer it in as broad a way as possible, because there's a few little questions in that bigger question. Obviously, we think numbers are going to continue to rise. This is something that I would say last year around this time, when we started to see the availability become pretty widespread. I think at this point we were starting to switch. I think May marked the date of the first online availability. In November of 2018, we actually had on-site sports wagering available. It's only continued to expand, obviously, since then. We expected after a few months, especially looking at football season, we weren't expecting a ton of calls in September. We were really thinking, like late October, November, that's when we'd start to see a spike. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't overly dramatic. It wasn't anything, it wasn't like floodgates open, but it was, 3 times the normal amount of calls that we're getting that month. So, it was an increase. Again, like I mentioned, we've seen an increase in the number of calls from younger folks too. And based on what we've seen as far as casino demographic, once sports betting became legal and available, we started to see younger faces in casinos across the state that were offering that type of gambling. So, it's kind of a shift in that regard. Now, with regard to my thoughts, like I mentioned, there's always opportunity in every type of situation. If it's a good, a bad, whatever, there's opportunity for things. And, I don't mean to sound naive. I'm not trying to paint a sunshine and rainbows picture or anything like that. There's going to be problems. There's going to be people that struggle. But there are things that we've never had available before that I think are really valuable and important to consider. Before online options came about, we didn't have access to accounts. We didn't have limit setting. We didn't have spend and deposit and time limits. The self-exclusion program has continued to amplify what it does and how it works, and that's more widespread than ever now. It's available for a number of different types of gambling. You have situations now where not only the individual, but family members, friends, counselors that are working with that person, they have tools in place that they can use to treat. They have tools that they can use to prevent problems. So there's a whole continuum of care that's in place that we didn't have before. And, is everybody going to use this? No. But does it give us more options and more ways to work with people? Absolutely. And I think that's what we really need to kind of focus on, as a group of providers, as a group of folks that are working in an outreach type position to raise that awareness of people that, there are things that we can do. There are steps that we can take. There are going to be people that still like to go to their bookie. They have a long-term relationship. They can bet on credit. They don't need to exchange money. They're comfortable. but there are going to be people who like this new form of availability, that like how many different wagers can be placed and how quickly they can be placed, and the fact that they can do it right on their phone and have an app, and you know, each site becomes more and more seamless than the one before it. So, you know, across the board, you're going to have involvement by more people, and I mean the numbers alone, you know, $1.4 billion. That's nothing short of absolutely remarkable. But you know, within that, my hope is that the more we talk about it, the less of a stigma there will be for people to reach out. The more understanding people will have to maybe, you know, I don't want to assume everybody's on board with it or against it, but the use of harm reduction techniques, you know, with somebody who might just be starting to maybe do things a little bit more than they should, some of these tools that I just talked about, they could be excellent to work with somebody who's maybe at that position and say, well, you know what, I'm going to limit how much I'm spending. I'm going to limit, you know, my sports betting to just Sunday afternoons between 1 and 2 o'clock. And then after that, it shuts down. You know, having things like that, I think that's really going to be kind of where the future lies, is how successful can that be? And that kind of remains to be seen. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah,
like, as far as that? Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any others? Any thoughts? Any comments? Questions? I appreciate your time today, guys. I really do, and I appreciate you guys asking me to participate. This was it was a nice distraction. I hope I didn't ramble on too long about, you know, all of our what you guys lived through as well, but it certainly was helpful for me.
Good. Thank you, Josh. We appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And if there's anything that I can do to help in the future, just let me know, or you know, reach out, shoot me an email, or give me a call.
All right. And everyone, don't forget to complete the survey, either from the QR code, or we're going to also send out an email with a link to the survey as well.
Perfect.
So stay safe, Josh.
You
Don't
too,
go outside.
everybody. All right. Take care. Have a good
Bye.
afternoon.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.